and welcome to Infosec Pros. I'm Kayne, Field CISO at Hyperproof, and I'm joined today by Jeff Warren, owner at Southlake Cyber. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks, Kayne.
Glad to have you on today and joining us from Orlando, Florida. But before we get to that, because this is a live stream, if you have a question for Jeff or if you've got a question about Southlake Cyber or about Hyperproof, please do drop it in the comments on either LinkedIn or on YouTube, and we'll take those as we go. So to start, Jeff, just tell us a little bit about yourself and about Southlake Cyber to begin with.
Sure, absolutely. So I started in IT about 20 years ago, a little bit more. Actually, I entered the field as a manager and later added the technical skills. Went into infrastructure consulting for a little while before entering some inside positions in enterprise and then eventually into management. What I saw time after time is, we're talking 10 or 15 years ago, were opportunities to improve as we went through. Back in those days, when we looked at security, I think it was heavily product-based. It was really key to what size check do you want to write, rather than a systemic look at what could be done to prevent some of these challenges. So about middle of 2022, I left a position as VP of Global Security for a logistics organization and started my own company to share some of those views with different industries and companies in my own backyard or nationally.
Fantastic. And you're saying that it was a question of how big of a check could they write or do you want to write? I think made me think of the inverse of how little could companies spend towards adequate defense. And you're right, it was very product solution oriented. I don't think we had a 10, 15 years ago when you got into this, did you see a lot of usage of frameworks? Because I know that we've had frameworks for a number of years, but I don't think I've seen adoption of them except in the past, like widespread adoption and knowledge in maybe the past decade.
No, I agree. That was some of the missing link. One of the things that I remember that was emblematic of the approach at the time, as I was doing a lot of traveling, you couldn't go to any major airport without seeing a Barracuda Networks advertisement somewhere.
I remember those.
And I think that was what was being preached at the time was, your existing solution doesn't work. You need to buy a new solution. It'll solve all your problems. And that's not to say that there isn't still some of that in the industry, but I think largely frameworks and standards have brought an approach that has, let's say, improved some of the product-based offerings by ensuring that there's coverage of more areas than simply I have an insufficient product.
Definitely. Well, I've already seen one question come in from LinkedIn, and so if you're watching this on LinkedIn and on YouTube, thank you for sending those in. I'm going to put that question on hold just for a moment, sent in by Sarah. So we're going to wait on your question just for a moment there. And so I had a question. It's kind of a framing, because when Jeff and I last talked, that was last year in Orlando, right? Down in Orlando, Florida, at a conference. We had a pretty good lunch there. And we talked about CISOs in 2024. And I want to revisit our conversation. So, Jeff, thinking back to our conversation mid-2023, we had some predictions. How do you predict the role of the CISO is going to change in 2024 compared to the prior years? And particularly in the context of emerging technologies, but also the risk of personal liability.
I think in 2023, we really got a better view of the professional risk associated with being a CISO. So in 2024, the fundamentals of the CISO's responsibilities haven't changed much or at all. But what's changed is that awareness. And I think it does go back to some of those soft skills and an understanding of the organization. So looking at things specifically, if we've got a CISO in an organization already, is there a clear understanding of the expectations for that role in regard to communication and coverage, both internally and externally? Does the CISO know what good looks like in terms of the organization, where the organization derives value? And I think if you are an individual looking to enter the CISO position, I think first of all, it's given people a bit more pause in doing that. And I think it is essential to understand from the outside, as best you can through the interview process, what that organization you're considering entering as the chief security leader looks like. What is the culture like? What is the expectation of that position within the organization? What happened to the last CISO? I think there's some more questions to be asked around the professional side, but the blocking and tackling, I think especially in the technical aspects, the threats really haven't changed. The risk landscape hasn't changed a whole lot. It is really focused on, I think, the CISO's sense of its responsibilities.
I think I agree with you on most of that, but I want to double click on part of it. So I agree with you on personal liability and on the prominence of that as conversation now for CISOs. And then ultimately, a CISO, we can't fix a broken culture, right? If a company's treating their CISO as the person who ends up holding the bag when there's a material event or breach, then the next CISO is probably not going to fix that. That's a board level conversation. It has to start like at that, probably at a much higher level than just the executive team. So I agree with you on all of those points, but you said that you think the risk and threat landscape hasn't changed much. And in, I think November 2022 was the last time I saw media coverage of the metaverse, because this other thing showed up on everybody's collective radar. It was generative AI. And so I want to explore some of those risks. So what would you say the potential risks and limitations of relying on generative AI are for critical security decisions, and how should CISOs be preparing for those challenges this year?
I think it's really going to come down to how your organization is applying AI. I was at Infosec World, as we said, a couple months ago. There was a really interesting panel around the use of AI, and there's very different perspectives among just 3 or 4 people. Everything from we don't allow it, somehow I guess it's prohibited, to we acknowledge it and ask users to register their business cases. So if you are an organization that is developing AI models, I think the bar is much higher than if you are an organization consuming models as a SaaS application. We talk about Copilot or Bard or anyone like that. I think your risk profile as a result of that varies on what you're consuming. I think if you're consuming it as a SaaS application, I think you're going to start to see a lot of those that risk management come out of a performance and supplier management process. Mm-hmm. And I think internally, as I said, the bar is a lot higher on the data science and training model end if you're going to run that internally. And that's, I would hope an organization would take pause at where they fall within that frame, and then start to build the risk management program around that.
Yeah, I think you're very right. I think ultimately, like if you're a supplier of generative AI or of some other form of artificial intelligence or even machine learning, I think the security concerns come to those CISOs as top of mind. And I'm sure if they've got a privacy team, the privacy concerns go to that team. I think, though, if you're purchasing or acquiring the services of an artificial intelligence, I think that's contractual. I think it's third-party risk management. I think there's more of a compliance risk because it's very hard to enforce controls outside of our own boundaries of our own organizations, right?
I agree. And if I could touch on something you alluded to earlier, I think the risk ownership discussion. I think what we learned in 2023 is this concept of absolute risk ownership at the senior level of the organization. It's I hate to call it a fantasy, but it's a fantasy. There's always going to be some sharing going on. And a CISO isn't operating within an organization for their own health. Their understanding going in, what services are being provided, have some understanding of what data is being transacted. But I see often, especially in some LinkedIn posts and other articles, this binary discussion. Well, senior leadership owns risk or they don't. It's just far more nuanced to that, and it goes back to the culture and the details of the organization.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think risk ownership and risk attribution are First of all, context clue here. We've had risks in business since we've had business. Actually, maybe like one day after we had business. And I'm sure companies and organizations, individuals have been doing risk management for just as many centuries. Whether or not they've been formally prescribed how to do it by a regulatory agency, I think that's part of the conversation. And I don't think we're going to solve that this year, but it's not a new concept. But I want to go to a couple audience questions that have come in so thank you for dropping those questions in the chat. Really do love the folks on LinkedIn who are watching and who are contributing. First question that I'll take is, I'm going to summarize. So generative AI, which is what we're currently talking about. So how do you foresee artificial intelligence shaping the future of cybersecurity strategies within organizations, particularly from a CISO's perspective?
That's an interesting question. I think we need to look first at how are we defining AI? Machine learning in cybersecurity has been around for a long time. I often see ML applications branded as AI. So, first off, what is it from the vendor perspective, and what is the product bringing? Is it ML? Is it superior analytics to your SIM of 5-10 years ago? Or is it authentic AI where decisions are being made based on new information and training models? I think as an organization, the vendor evaluation process is going to be essential, and understanding what they're getting around those products, and then seeing whether they can be incorporated in the strategy for any sort of, are they bringing capability? Are they bringing efficiencies? And then making a decision and how they fit into the strategy based on those questions versus, a white paper.
Yeah, I think that's a good and nuanced experience there that you're sharing. And I'm going to RSA this year. Are you going to be there, Jeff, actually? You going to be popping around?
I am not this year.
Okay, well, all right. Well, I will report back on it because I'm expecting everything's going to be all singing, all dancing, everything's artificial intelligence, kind of like the horror show we had when all the marketing teams went, zero trust, that's a word, let's use that word. And I'm always thinking back of like FTC talking about AI washing. And how they're planning on investigating that. So you're right. I think from a CISO's perspective, you have to ask, what is this that's new? Because we've had ML for a very long time, and it's not new technology. And I also just brought up a regulator. So let me bring up actually, no, we've got another AI question here. So thank you for continuing to drop questions in the chat. I had questions in mind, but these are more fun. So here's the question. So while we're on AI, how do CISOs balance the need for innovative AI technologies with the potential risks and uncertainties that those technologies bring?
I think if we look at this, an approach to AI where it is going to ingest information, make decisions, and take actions on your behalf, which is, I think, the vision for really AI and cyber. Mm-hmm. You need to have a clear understanding of what you're delegating, what you're offloading to that solution. XDR has been around for a long time. I think I don't know a ton of companies that have got an environment that suits it, but I kind of go back to that. If you were to put AI in XDR, what would you be willing to have it do without asking you for permission? And so that goes back to it having a clear understanding of what your baseline looks like. How does a threat manifest in terms of how that AI model applies it? And then is there a check period? Is there a wait? Is there a queue? Is there an escalation that occurs before it takes those actions? I think as we move to more advanced AI, we begin to solve that, and it is transformative. There's no doubt about it. But right now, I don't think we're there. We're not to the point where we're hitting the easy button. So I think if I were an organization looking to do that, I would scope it very carefully and very narrowly to an environment where if something is misunderstood, it's not going to cause a lot of damage.
Yeah, I think that's a fair and reasoned approach. And ultimately, like having an AI, I think there's a demarcation point mentally for most folks between having an AI do triage versus doing incident handling versus actually rolling response, right? And I think right now we're okay conceptually with the triage part, but actually having it do incident handling based on our own organization's incident handling guidelines and procedures, I don't know a lot of people who are really leaned in there. And I think the only other thing I was talking to a reporter yesterday about the concept of generative AI being used to write incident handler reports. And that to me is a great use case for it, because most people get into like cybersecurity stuff that they enjoy the hands-on, the picking apart a puzzle, the looking through a needle in a needle stack and trying to figure out like what happened when, kind of detective work really. They don't get excited about writing up the report. That's not their joy. And I could see generative AI having a good fact-based, unbiased, and far less likely to drop a poop emoji or other opinion into a disclosure. I've seen these, right? You've seen these, of course, in incident handling reports where people drop memes in them, and those tend to go poorly. So I think there is some value there, but you're right. Having it roll XDR and then get full into response.
I think the biggest use case is identifying non-attacks. So I think we've made some huge advances in SIM. They are not really signature based anymore, but they are really largely about pattern recognition. So if X happens and Y happens and Z happens, then it equals A. The real value add for AI is taking a variable that the solution's never seen before, running that in a simulation and identifying that there's a threat there that perhaps we wouldn't have otherwise identified.
I think you're right. And I want to thank the audience for continuing to drop questions in the chat. I want to go back to the role of the CISO before we move to our next topic, just to fill out the conversation on CISOs we were having. So let's look into our collective crystal ball here, Jeff. Mine has been broken for years. Maybe yours is better. But how do you foresee the role of the CISO changing in the next 5 years? And I'm particularly thinking of accountability and regulatory pressures.
I really think there's going to be a slight adjustment in how that CISO role is defined. I think you're going to see more CISOs, I hope, right, because it's been my methodology, take on a compliance mindset, and it's compliance with a small c. So working within environments that there is greater consistency and positive control over the environment, and understanding on a real-time or up-to-date basis on what is going on with that environment. I think you're going to see more embracing that versus the audit, lowercase a, audit is separate. Well, we really ramp up when we're preparing for an audit. Well, what if an audit was tomorrow? What if an audit was tomorrow every day? How might we do things different? And I think those controls and approaches that come from a compliance mindset, a plan, do, check, act mindset, can help drive some of those improved outcomes and get the CISO a better handle on what's going on within the environment beyond the red team, blue team thinking.
Well, thank you. And just my producer said that my audio was a bit sketchy. Has it improved?
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. You can hear me. That's always a nice sign. It's always weird when you're doing a live event and your computer goes, let's make it exciting for you. So just going back to the conversation on the role of the CISO and your lowercase c, lowercase a of audit and compliance, there's a question on LinkedIn here I want to explore. And again, thank you for dropping these questions in the chat. Really do enjoy the audience engagement today. The question, Jeff, is how do the new SEC regulations specifically impact the responsibilities and strategies of CISOs in managing cybersecurity risks?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think there's many people trying to solve on a daily basis. I think, especially in regard to the reporting requirements. Look, I had an early career in journalism and in newspapers, and specifically, if that dates me just a tad. But we had a saying: if you don't want it printed, don't let it happen. Mm-hmm. And so I've always been a fan of transparency. I think the CISO role, especially when in terms of the new SEC requirements, is going to have a very good relationship with their C-level peers, including chief legal counsel. I think certainly as a CISO, I think they wouldn't go rogue, but should an event occur, whether this comes from a tabletop exercise or just a conversation, what are we going to report? How soon are we going to make that report? Let's get on the same page in advance and have that approach communicated across the senior levels of the organization so they all have an understanding of how this might go. That is going to help the CISO avoid being in a position where they feel like they're serving two masters, which is their own ethical compass and the organization. And I think it's key that the CISO also recognize that chief counsel is not their counsel. It's going to be essential that they understand if they're not making that report, what does that mean for them potentially professionally and personally?
Yeah, I think that's very fair, and a good point that you make that the chief counsel may not end up representing them. I'm pretty sure Joe Sullivan learned that in an unpleasant fashion. Well, I want to move to our second topic, and it's kind of aligned to another question that came in on the chat. And we're going to start talking about measuring cybersecurity program effectiveness, because I know that's something that you get excited about, and something that I've done in executive advisory motions before of like, look and see how is a company doing with the cybers, whether it's the CISO asking for a second opinion, or whether it's the board saying, well, we don't think the CISO is actually doing their duty. So let's start at the very top. How do organizations, and as well as some third parties, Jeff, how are they effectively using self-assessment questionnaires to gauge their cybersecurity posture? And what would you really say the limitations are of that approach?
I think, especially for organizations with no specific regulatory requirements, no specific certification requirements, SOC 2, ISO, whatever the case may be, I think SAQs can be a great way for organizations of all sizes to figure out where they are in their roadmap. Are they where they want to be, or do they need to make adjustments? CISV8 in particular is a great entry level, fairly simplified, plenty of tools, free tools available to do that for organizations to assess where they're at. With that said, it is very subjective, and in going into it, I would hope that if it was the security team conducting that, or compliance team, or whomever conducting that review, that they do so with an open mind and well understand the answers they're putting down, because that is what they can use to improve on the program. And I think C2M2 is another good one. It's a bit more advanced, but they can be great tools for especially organizations starting out to see where they are without burdening themselves with specific certifications or the expense of third-party assessments.
All right, so SAQs are one method of a self-assessment. Something else that we see dominant in the industry is the idea of a capability maturity model. So, Jeff, tell us a little about how the role of capability maturity models is in evaluating the maturity and also in the effectiveness of cybersecurity programs.
I think CMMs absolutely need the organization support, or there is no sense in doing it. So if this is a security team initiative, it's bound to fail because it is not going to be applied uniformly enough to make a significant impact. If it's part of the organization's process, and again, whether it's a requirement or whether it's just a desire, done properly, CMMs are going to allow them to continue to iterate and improve over time by assessing every 12 or 6 months or 18 or whatever they want to do, where they are in their roadmap, provided they take the necessary steps to move those things forward. By themselves, they are point in time snapshots of the organization, but in used to develop a roadmap, it can be enormously helpful.
I think that's fair. So you can definitely take that point in time, and most CMMs I've seen have got less subjective guidelines than SAQs. Would you say that's fair?
I think that's fair. I think as you grow, as you go kind of up the chain, you're getting a bit more specificity around it. I think where you can get into trouble is if there's CMM that is really geared for a professional to be applied. I think there can be some misunderstandings around what is being requested. So you really want to ensure you're aligned as an organization with the model you are using.
Okay. All right. And then the third thing that we see, and then I want to go to a question from the chat, but the third thing we see for measuring effectiveness really is certifications. So, or organizational certifications, not individual certifications. So how do certifications like PCI DSS or ISO, or I don't know, even a CMMC, how do those really shape an organization's approach to cybersecurity? And are there any gaps that those certifications just might overlook?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think the risk with some of the certifications, because I think all of them are based on that point in time, and generally, let's say a year.
Mm-hmm.
If the organization is focused on, let's say after the initial certification, which is going to be an uplift no matter what, after that, if the organization's focus is on that certification and 6 or 8 weeks before recertification time each year, there's a mad scramble. It is not going to have the desired effect. So if I have a doctor's appointment and I know the last one wasn't great, and a week before I start hitting the treadmill every day, it is not going to have a measurable impact on the advice I got a year ago. So I think it's essential that they be looked at as something that really that we are working on for a third party, but it is intended to be guidance to operate the rest of the year. And I think the most mature organizations are ones that go, oh, there's an audit next week. Okay, we ready? Yeah, of course we're ready, because we've taken those practices to heart day in and day out. There is no panic mode around those assessments when they come around.
I think you're right. I think that, having worked with the defense industrial base in that as a CISO, having audits regularly show up, you just have to be aware of it. It's like, if you want to work in certain industries, and I think actually an increasing number of industries at this point, you're just going to get audited. You plan for it as a regular business occurrence. You don't plan for it as being a special day, right? It's just another part of doing business in a given segment.
If I could add, if your organization doesn't have an audit function, continuous monitoring can be done within any organization. So what if we sample the number of, the number of lockouts? What if we sample the number of S3 buckets that have encryption? That can be done anytime, and that information can be churned back in, and we figure out, okay, we had 2 of 3 buckets that have encryption, but the third didn't. Why is that? Let's figure and improve on that. And so there are no, or at least fewer surprises come actual audit time, because we've monitored what we've done through the process rather than stumbling upon things in preparation for an audit.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also an informed comment in the chat that I'll bring up at this point, just about setting the audit scope. I do think that is appropriate, and that you have to plan for that as part of just normal ongoing business actions. But I want to go to a question that came in very early in the live stream here. And we're talking about certifications, we're talking about assessments. So Jeff, how would you say you assess the return on investment of cybersecurity initiatives in an organization?
That's a challenge, and I wish there was a formula for it, a secret formula for it, but I don't know it. I think if a certification was done for a specific business line, it is fairly easy to quantify that against the business earned, because we had ISO 27001. I think it is always going to be something where cybersecurity team is not generating income. They're cost center no matter how you look at it. But in terms of maybe transitioning that mindset to have them be a value center, they are whatever team is maintaining that certification is preserving the value of that contract and that business by maintaining the certification. I think that's an easier line to draw than an organization that has no specific requirements and just goes through a year. It doesn't have any attacks, so I guess we're doing the right things.
Right.
I think if that certification is for a specific business line, I think it's fairly easy to make that connection.
I don't know. I'm going to push on that just a little bit, Jeff, because I've heard of cyber. I mean, first of all, you and I agree, cybersecurity has historically been thought of as a cost center, and often a cost center that nobody wants, because it doesn't do anything good, and the only thing that ever comes out of it is bad news. So who wants one of those? But I do think that at mature organizations, cybersecurity, effective cybersecurity, can be a competitive differentiator in helping to win new business. And where I'm thinking of this is if you are choosing to enter a new market and it has a certification requirement, like let's say you've previously not done anything with the defense industrial base and you're like, hey, CMMC sounds like fun, let's go for level 2. Which is not an easy lift by any measure, right? But if you can make the business case of, look, if we put a few $1 million towards our cybersecurity program, we're going to make a few hundreds of $1 million because it's federal contracting, wouldn't you say that's a good return on investment? Now, admittedly, not an easy return on investment by any measure.
Yeah, I think we're saying similar things. I think if that's used to acquire new business, absolutely. It would be helpful if the security decision makers were in the room when that conversation occurred.
Goodness, yes.
What you
Yeah,
wouldn't
I think
want
you need
is
tight alignment with go-to-market
right,
ultimately.
we won this business, but we need to be CMM level 2 by next Thursday. I think that's where alignment of, because the sales folks and the C-level outside the CISO probably don't fully understand some of that. But I think alignment at the C level with the security group is key to be able to effectively deliver on some of those things.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you really, as a business, have to get ahead on that, because otherwise you don't want to have somebody say, well, we need just FedRAMP moderate by the end of the quarter so that we can win this new business.
That's no problem,
Although
right? You can do that.
Although if people want to learn more about FedRAMP, I do have a show where I drink beer. Is that a beer you've got in there, Jeff, by the way? Should we do
No,
beer
it's
reviews?
water.
Okay. All right, fine. Well, I'm still on coffee today. But yeah, check out Drafting Compliance, which is the show where we talk about FedRAMP moderate. I want to move to our next major topic here, which was about the labor shortage or the perceived labor shortage in the cybersecurity industry. Because that's been in the news quite a lot. I know ISC squared often. I mean, is it ISC squared or are we supposed to call it ISC2 now?
ISC2 now.
Okay, I'll eventually update my head. Software update on that is pending. So Jeff, what are the factors you'd say that contribute to the perceived shortage of cybersecurity professionals in the industry?
Yeah, I've wrestled with this one myself. We've got some millions of openings, or it's really all just FUD and self-fulfilling marketing on behalf of sort of our industry. I think when I think back to the mid to late 90s, there were MCSE boot camps on every street corner. And those folks were hired before they finished boot camp.
I'm laughing, Jeff, because I got I'm an old Unix guy, and I got my MCSE mostly as a joke because they said TCP/IP networking was an elective, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go do that. This menuing system, it looks like fun.
Yeah, it was everybody. That was the goal. Is everybody was trying to be an MCSE unless they were doing Unix administration. But I think that was a really different climate than we have now. I think what we've got right now in regard to open positions is really a skills gap versus an empty chair that we need to fill. Mm-hmm. So whether that's around cloud, whether it's in AI, cloud and AI security, I think those are the opportunities that we're going to see in the next 12 to 24 to 36 months. More targeted, more strategic, rather than we just need warm bodies in cybersecurity. That is, I'm not hiring. I haven't hired in better over a year, but that is my sense of things based on people I talk to in the industry.
Did you see that in the news? I want to say it was earlier this week or late last week that the federal government was starting to look at legislation that would not require 4-year degrees for individuals to go work in cybersecurity in the federal government, because they were like, we just can't hire anybody, and this seems dumb.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, I did see that, and in fact, I saw, and I'm going to butcher this since I didn't take notes, but a few days ago, I had an ISC2 chapter meeting, and there was some discussion about certifications and the possibility of removing the exam requirement and subbing in for, say, CISSP, just that you've attended the training. So I think there are some attempts to lower the bar. I don't know at the moment whether I think that's good or bad. But I do think there have to be some standards around this because cyber roles are also different. I think as a hiring manager, each individual hiring manager needs to understand what they're looking for the role, rather than base it on simply whether the bid requires a certification or the position requires a certification.
I like that you've got hiring managers in there, and I'd encourage them to talk to HR and stop putting in these idealized job descriptions where you're going to get the ideal candidate who has a CISSP, 20 years of Kali Linux, and a Purple Heart, and is willing to take an entry-level job at $15 an hour. Right.
I think
those are a problem in our industry.
Full transparency, my degree is in communications and not the network kind. You know, that I went to school for that journalism career way back when. So I am a career changer, just have career changed 20 or 25 years ago. I think, as you said, the requirements for you have to have a cybersecurity degree or a master's in cyber, and you're going to be a SOC analyst for $18 an hour is woefully unrealistic. You're not going to get people to take those roles. And unfortunately, the messaging right now is these roles are here waiting for you. I am concerned about the long-term effects of the real role being able to deliver on some of those promises.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we're starting to see culturally, at least, is with generative AI having some applicability now in this space, I think it's possible to hire less senior people, and they get up to speed quicker if, and this is an if, your mileage will vary, I can guarantee you that. Like if you've got a generative AI that's been trained on, like, here's how we produce a report, that means they don't, you don't need somebody who's taken English 210.
Right.
I think that's a course that exists, to produce an English report, right? You can just fob that bit of the work off, and you can start focusing on what are the hard skills this individual needs, not necessarily the soft skills.
That's interesting. I had not considered that. If you look at it the other way, it's, there's this desire to have the soft skills, but you're right. Some of that can be offloaded to generative AI. Mm-hmm. I think what I believe firmly has gone away for the most part are the entry-level SOC positions where that's where you start. You either start at help desk or you start at SOC and you work your way up. I think we're going to see those SOC positions be few and far between because generative AI is taking some of that analysis out of the hands, and you're going to be looking at individuals that can manage that platform versus manage the data that's coming across the screen.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I can think of some of the best analysts I've had the privilege of working alongside or hiring and promoting, and they came from neurodivergent backgrounds where, if you sat them down in a room and you tried to have a cup of coffee with them, they would have a panic attack. And if you put them on a Slack conversation, they would talk your ear off and give you an incredibly detailed malware analysis. Maybe you didn't even ask for it. So I think that we really do need a blended approach moving forward with who we're bringing into organizations, and it's not like, I don't think it's all going to be one thing or the other thing. But I want to take another question in the chat here, and then I've got one last question for you, Jeff, and then I think we're approaching time. And the question is, do you think and this is about the labor shortage, don't you think the labor shortage is related to the lack of training or graduation courses?
Trying to make sure I understand that question. I think specialized training for the roles, I think there is some of that. It may be, and I haven't seen a whole lot of this, that there is, an unwillingness to offer trainings for some of those roles. I see some of that even internally. There's some interest in transferring people out of positions and upskilling them for whatever the new roles are. But I don't really see a lot of interest on the fresh hire side to pick somebody that is a little bit green and train them for those specific roles. I do think that's a limitation. And I think if you have, if there really are 3 million or 10 million or whatever number of openings, I think that is the opportunity to resolve those fairly quickly, is to bring people in and train them for those roles. But I haven't seen that. Here's the position, we'll offer training in many of the posts that have come across my screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I will say I have, from my background, seen a lot of that, and it's mostly through levers, local veterans employment representatives,
Okay.
who will place skilled veterans who may have had a service career, have transitioned out, and they want to go work in cybersecurity. And quite often, I see that market segment almost overrepresented in terms of candidates who end up getting easier job placement, because first of all, we don't have to teach them what the idea of security is, but second of all, they get 12 to 48 weeks of training for free so that they can have a successful career.
I think that is a great example. I don't think the numbers are sufficient there, are enough to really fill these gaps if we've actually got them. If it was
no, you're 100%. Yeah, if we've got millions of jobs open at every possible minute, that's a problem. Yeah. All right, well, I want to go to one last question, Jeff, before we close down for the day. But if there's any other questions from the chat, please do drop them in. And I want to go to retention, because we've only been talking about the front part of it, right? And I don't want to create a cybersecurity job retention revolving door. So what are the most significant challenges in retaining those skilled cybersecurity talent inside of organizations?
I think a year or two ago, maybe, I think salary was probably what most people would say. I think at this stage of thing, I think burnout is probably what I would see as one of the most significant risks. And whether that's an organization that has already gone through layoffs recently and now we're doing more with less, or that's just the sense of the awesome responsibility around what a security practitioner is doing on a daily basis. I think understanding how they are feeling and managing sort of morale at a team and an individual basis is key to retaining that talent.
Yeah, I think burnout is a definite challenge, and great insight there. Hopefully artificial intelligence will help with some of the burnout issues, but also you have to have a good company culture, really, to ensure that people are doing the things that they love doing, and not having to do the things that they don't enjoy doing, like sending evidence to auditors to maintain those certifications that allow us to win new business, right? If you can offload that to a machine, it's going to be a lot easier than if you have to spend your day like collecting screenshots, which
and I think
not fun at all.
An organizational appreciation for the contributions of cyber, I think, are also key. I think often it's looked at as the mystic arts, is what's happening in that room down the hall, or whatever that Teams channel is now. I think the organization can also help bring the cyber team, the security team, the IT team into the fold with by getting an understanding of what they're dealing with on a daily basis and what contributions they're making to the organization.
Right, and really showcasing those inside of the organization so that it's not a black box cost center thing. Fantastic. Well, with that, Jeff, I want to thank you for being on the show. And if you're watching this and if you know somebody who we should have on the show, or alternatively, if you're that person who should just be on the show, drop a note in the comments or just DM me directly on LinkedIn. With that, Jeff, I really want to thank you for joining us, and thank our audience for your great questions today and for tuning in for today's live stream. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.